Welcome to California State University Chico's online field instructor orientation. This is Module 5, Feedback and Evaluation. The learning objectives for this module include understanding the importance of constructive feedback, understanding and practicing using the elements of effective feedback, and reviewing the elements of an effective final evaluation. What is the goal of feedback? Feedback is an important part of a student's professional development and your development as a supervisor. Students prefer ongoing and critical feedback, and the goal ultimately is the students learning and improving their practice. They will make mistakes, and helping the student to understand that and normalizing that for them right from the beginning of their field practicum is an important conversation to have with them. Thinking about what your own experiences have been in terms of receiving feedback is often an important first step to take in terms of looking at what your style will be in delivering feedback. When you received feedback, what made it a positive or negative experience for you? What are some of the elements of effective feedback? First and foremost, having very clear guidelines for what your expectations are for the student are really important. The student needs to understand what you expect the outcome to be when you assign them a particular task. Another important element is direct observation. So beginning to think about how it is you will have direct observation of your student so that you can provide feedback. Oftentimes, the feedback that we're providing students is based on what students have self-reported to us about a particular situation or some work that they have done. It might also be gained from reviewing documentation that you've had the student do. But trying to find opportunities where you can really observe them while they're practicing skills and knowledge that you're working on with them is an important part of being able to provide constructive feedback. Perhaps co-facilitating a group, perhaps having them in group supervision, asking if you can sit in on an interview that they may be doing with an individual case they've been working with, but finding some opportunity to directly observing them using the skills you're teaching them is an important part of being able to provide constructive feedback. Another important element is empathy and really soliciting the student or the supervisee's perspective and then conveying to them that you have some understanding about what their perspective is. Timeliness is also another critical element in providing feedback. The sooner the better is really the best case scenario here. So when you become aware of a situation that you've had some concerns around, or there's information that you're aware of that your student really needs in order to better facilitate the work they're doing, providing them with that feedback and that information in a timely manner is really critical to their learning. Regularity is another important element of feedback, normalizing it for the student. So at the very beginning of your relationship, having that conversation with them about your thoughts on feedback and how it's critical to their growth and development. And that your expectations are they will make mistakes and that the feedback you provide them around that situation is intended to help them grow and develop as a practitioner. Balance is another important element of feedback. Trying to ensure that along with some critical feedback, there is also some positive feedback that the student receives. So if there's a situation which you would have liked to see them handle differently, You also comment on the aspects that maybe they have done well or performed well, or other situations you've seen them perform well in, and therefore you have confidence in their ability to also turn it around the next time this situation occurs. Being concise and direct is really important, and offering the student some very concrete suggestions about how you'd like to see them do it differently next time. And finally, follow-up is really important. Students need to understand that once you have provided them feedback and you've given them some suggestions about how they can integrate this feedback into their practice, that you are going to ask them how that went. So if they come in, they share a case situation with you, you provide some feedback to them about some things they might do differently next time. It's important to ask them about that next time. That when they come in for supervision the following week, you're following up and asking how that conversation went with that particular client or consumer that they were working with. How did it feel different to them using some of the feedback that you had provided? It's important to know your student, so having a conversation with them about how they generally respond to feedback. Are there ways it can be delivered that they are likely to be more receptive to feedback? Is there a history that they might be bringing to this supervisory relationship from other relationships in which feedback has been delivered in a manner that wasn't constructive or wasn't helpful to them? What was not helpful about that? And is that information that you can then integrate into your delivery method? Again, having concrete examples that you can provide them when you're delivering the feedback is really important. Examples of the behavior that you're concerned about, as well as examples of what you'd like the outcome to be, or your expectation about how you'd like that behavior to change. Whenever you're going to deliver feedback, it's important to consider whether or not you are a credible source for that feedback. And again, this has to do with if you were not somebody who was able to actually observe the situation, is it more relevant for the person who observed the student in that situation to provide the feedback? So considering who is the best source to deliver the feedback is an important part of this process as well. Whenever you're planning to provide your student with some feedback, considering your motivation. Is the motivation around that student's growth and development? Is the motivation around the student made a mistake, and as a result, you have also then been told about this mistake and are under some pressure to correct the situation? Is your motivation that there are a number of things going on in your agency right now that are somewhat stressful, and perhaps providing feedback to your student is a way that you can let off some of that stress? So always considering your motivation is important. Also looking at, is the feedback you're going to deliver to the student something that they will be able to take action on? If you're providing the student with feedback about some aspect of their appearance or their personality, do they have the ability to actually take action on that and look at doing something differently? Is the feedback you're giving them going to result in a behavior that then will be acknowledged by your organization or rewarded in some way? So if their documentation has been slow and you have felt like they have not been able to keep up, and you're working with them on some time management skills to help them keep up, with their paperwork or with their documentation, is there some way that that behavior then is acknowledged by the organization? When you consider delivering constructive feedback, a couple things to keep in mind. You want to really describe the problem behavior. So get very specific about the behavior that is of concern to you. Explain the consequences of that behavior and your feelings about it. Then provide very specific information so the student can be clear what your expectations are. And at the same time, I think you want to avoid being redundant. And finally, really ensuring that you're emphasizing the desired behavior. So if the problem behavior is that their documentation is not up to date, helping them understand that when documentation is not kept up to date, it has the impact of perhaps delaying billing, it has perhaps the impact of delaying a court decision that has to do with that specific client situation, helping them understand your feelings about that impact, the feelings of the organization, the feelings of the client that might be impacted, providing specific information about what your expectation is. That documentation will be completed each week, and emphasizing then desired behaviors, that you know that they have writing skills that will allow them to do this, that you know they are going to be able to put together a schedule that will provide enough time for them to complete their documentation in a timely manner. Once you've provided feedback, it's helpful to ask the student for their reaction. What is it that they heard you say? What do they understand your expectations to be? Is there a time frame that you have suggested you're expecting this change to happen within? It's important to be willing to be influenced by how the student might respond as well. So if the student is able to tell you they understand your expectations, but they'd like you to consider that they have this, this, and this planned over the course of the next week, and so would it be possible that they have 2 extra days? I mean, allow yourself to be open and influenced by the student's response. Ultimately, seeking agreement about how you're going to address the concern. Oftentimes, it's important to consider what might be the most difficult areas for you to provide feedback on. If there are areas that are difficult for you to address, then finding a colleague that you can talk to about this and get their ideas about how to bring that topic to the attention of your student can be helpful. Certainly, you can always reach out to your faculty field liaison, ask for their input. But keeping in mind that addressing areas of concern early will reduce the likelihood of conflict and really increase the student's accountability. Keep in mind that providing feedback is really a function of the gatekeeping role that you take on as an agency field instructor. Evaluation is another function of the gatekeeping role, and many elements of effective feedback also contribute to a positive evaluation experience. Be aware that the evaluation process can be stressful for students. Often students set very high expectations for themselves. Often students have had other evaluation experiences that have not been positive experiences for them. So soliciting again your students' experience with evaluation, their level of stress, when it's time to complete the evaluation, both of those elements can be helpful in terms of having a more positive evaluation experience. Giving yourself enough time to complete the evaluation online is really important. You can go on, complete areas of the evaluation and save it and come back if you're not able to complete the evaluation all at the same time. When you have completed it and your student has completed their part, it's important to schedule time with them to review it together. To consider the areas where maybe your score is different and have a discussion around what contributed to those differences. It's also an opportunity to look at areas where maybe the student is disappointed with the score that they received and to talk about how they might get to a place where they felt better about that score. What specific knowledge or skills do they need to be working on to improve that particular area of the evaluation? Keep in mind that it's always important that your evaluation be based on clear guidelines and expectations that you establish with the student at the very beginning of that placement. So if there are learning tasks that were assigned in hopes that the student would develop a certain skill set or knowledge base, and your evaluation doesn't reflect that, it will be important to talk with the student about where you think things got off track in terms of that learning contract and the opportunities and learning tasks that the student was given in order to achieve that skill set. Try to objectively evaluate your student. If you've been a field instructor before, you obviously have other experiences with other students. Keep in mind that each student is an individual. And while you may have had a student that was very skilled, knowledgeable, seemed to catch on quickly to things in previous years, and this student seems to take a little bit longer, it's important to evaluate that student on their own merits and not compare and contrast to previous students. The evaluation should reflect strengths as well as their limitations. So it may very well be that there are some areas the student scores fairly high on and other areas where you really feel like it's an area of growth for the student. So again, explaining that to the student early on, that you expect the evaluation will reflect that there are some areas they will be rated very highly on and other areas clearly where growth and development needs to occur. Scores on the evaluation really should not be a surprise to the student. If they've been receiving regular feedback from you throughout the placement, in all likelihood, when they read your scores on the evaluation, none of it will seem like a surprise. There are two evaluations that get done, one at the end of each semester. So there is a fall semester evaluation and a spring semester evaluation. Students may be asked to write up an assessment of their progress at mid-semester. Individual faculty field liaisons often ask students to write a brief narrative in the seminar about where they feel they're progressing in the placement. If that's done, they will likely bring that to you as well and ask you to sign off on it. But it will be something that's generated by the student. Please keep in mind that for BSW and foundation year students, our benchmark score is 3, meaning progressing in demonstration. And when we say benchmark score, what we're suggesting is that the majority of our students will receive 3s by the end of the semester, by the end of the BSW or foundation year. We have many students who are disappointed when they don't receive 4s and 5s. It's important to help students understand that a 3 means that they are indeed progressing in the manner that we expect them to. We use a software system to manage our online field evaluations called the Intern Placement Tracking System, or the IPT. So early in the fall semester, you'll receive an email that provides you with login information. Your login information will allow you to go in and access your evaluation form for your student on the IPT software. A couple weeks prior to the end of the semester, you'll receive an email, and that email will tell you that that form is now ready for you to go in and complete. If you have questions or concerns trying to access the evaluation forms, please contact Nicole Davis in our field office. Her email is nmdavis@csuchico.edu, and Nicole is happy to help you with any questions or concerns that you might have. There is an opportunity for you to reset your password. It will ask you to establish your own password, but if you should lose it or forget it, you can log back into the system with just your username and be able to reset your password. But if you run into any complications at all, don't hesitate to contact Nicole. This is the end of Module 5. There is a 6th module that will orient you to the IPT system, and we highly encourage you to review that module as well. Upon the completion of this module, you have learned the importance of constructive feedback, what the elements of effective feedback are, and finally the elements of an effective final evaluation. Thank you for participating in our online field instructor training.